So first I'll introduce myself very quickly. My name is Elizabeth Strauss, and I am the co-coordinator of the Critical Inquiry Seminar Series through CRiHHI, and I'm also a second-year doctoral student here in the School of Nursing. Before we get started with our talk, I do want to acknowledge that we are on the traditional and unceded territory of Musqueam peoples. And I would like to introduce Dr. Vicky Bungay, who is an associate professor here in the School of Nursing and a Canada Research Chair Tier 2. She's the founder and leader of the Capacity Research Unit and is also an affiliate member of CRiHHI. And so she will be speaking with us today about her work in talking about ethics and honorarium in working with just populations who are marginalized or face discrimination. So welcome, Vicky.
Great, thank you. Thanks so much. So, as Elizabeth said, I'm Vicky, and so we have about 55 minutes together, I guess. And what I'm hoping that we can do is that I can walk you through some of the things that have been happening, and probably in my program of research over the last dozen years or so, and some of the issues that I think all of us face around this really complicated thing we call research participation fees, honoraria, compensation, reimbursement, however we want to phrase it, and really start to unpack kind of what do those things mean in practice, and what do they really mean for the people who are actually participating in research as well as for the researchers who are undertaking this, and where do those things collide? Because in many instances they don't necessarily play out in the same kind of way. So I won't give a big long spiel about me and all that I do, but and I want to say a big thanks out to everybody on GoToMeeting. I've had several people who have let me know. So I'm assuming all those little clicks and beeps that I hear are people joining us. And so for those folks, if you lose me, I know I tend to pace a bit when I'm speaking. So if you lose me, let us know, and I'll try not to move too far away from the microphone. So what I thought we could do is just kind of to ground kind of how we think about these kinds of things, because the issue of honoraria is an issue of research ethics, and research ethics are of course fundamental to all that we do. And so we have to kind of think about what does that really mean, and what does it mean in health research ethics in particular. And so very simply, research ethics are the moral norms or the standards of conduct that we use that help us to undertake the investigations. They're very important to what we do. They have a purpose. It's about health services. It's about health research. It's about improving the health of the people that we work with. And they serve to protect research participants, promote public trust in research and the research institutions, such as the one that we're in here today. They help to promote, or are intended to promote, rigorous and high-quality research and promote accountability, respect, fairness, and self-determination. And so these things are very important, and these are the guidelines or the things that we think about that are supposed to, we'll say, inform. Hi, we're just getting started. So these are the things that kind of inform and help us think about how we think about honoraria and the things that we kind of grapple with, and help us, as we think, make decisions. So a lot of the work that I'm going to talk about today and examples that I'm going to draw on come from what is called the Ethics Project, which is a larger project, CRiHHI funded project that was really developed to respond to the need to ethically interrogate or think about the complex intersections between research methodology and research ethics in practice, particularly working with people engaged in sex work and health research in which sex workers are either participants or sex work is a variable in the context of the study that people are doing. And we wanted to look at this in the context of how these kinds of methodological and ethical challenges play out within the interrelated kind of personal, our beliefs, assumptions, and attitudes, our social relationships, and the bigger structural factors that influence how we might experience these challenges and how we might actually think about some of the solutions to some of the challenges that we experience. And so I want to give a big nod out to that project because, as I said, the data is specifically coming from that. But I'm also going to draw on a lot of other examples that have actually led to that kind of project happening and why we did it. So in our project activities to date, and this project is still undergoing, we're in the, we have all of our data and we're kind of looking at now what we're going to do with it all, is we actually extracted all of the CRiHHI research funding that has occurred since 2003, where sex work and health research intersect in some way, in which CRiHHI has provided funding to somebody who's doing that, or a project that's doing that kind of work, looking at those intersections. We've done qualitative interviews and field notes with sex work research participants, sex work community service organizations, because that's often where the research occurs, and researchers who are actually engaged in doing the everyday work of the research. And in doing that, those researchers are people who have held CRiHHI funds that are specifically concerned with sex work and health. We've looked at sex work communities research materials, the whole variety of materials that advocacy organizations and not-for-profit groups use to support their members engaging in research or to provide direction for potential researchers who want to participate in those communities. To date, we've done a general coding of all the data. We've analyzed the CRiHHI database for funding, and we're just in this preliminary phase of analysis. So some of what I'm sharing here today is that idea around what some of that preliminary analysis around incentivization and reimbursement and what that kind of means. So just to give an overview of who has taken part, you can kind of see that we have a sample of 86 people that we're drawing from, and we have people from these 4 main provinces, and that the distribution across provinces is intentional because these are the provinces where the bulk of the CRiHHI money rests. These 3 in particular are where the most of the money, with the bulk of money being between BC and Manitoba. And you can see who our research, who took part in terms of who was a researcher, community staff, and our sex worker research participants. And all of our sex worker research participants were people who had participated in a CRiHHI funded study, as well as our researchers in the community as well. And we do have people, and it's not on here, we have people who overlap in roles. So we have people who are also sex workers who are researchers and hold academic appointments, sex workers who are leaders in community service organizations and that sort of thing. So there was, I think we had about 20 people who overlapped in diverse roles between these kinds of things. So that's who we talked to. I'll just give you a little bit on the CRiHHI database. As I said, this is where the bulk of the money is, and the only reason that I'm doing this is it gives kind of context to when we talk about honoraria and how it plays out in terms of there are some geographical differences and those kinds of things. The other piece is the bulk of the CRiHHI funding has been in HIV vulnerability research, or HIV treatment and access to treatment, vaccination development, and only we have just a handful of studies that have actually looked at social determinants of health. And we have out of the I think there's out of the 51 studies that have been funded, only 1 has been interventional in research design. Although many of our participants participate in research that is not about sex work, but that is interventional in terms of drug trials and those kinds of things. So it just gives a bit of a context and a bit of background. And if anybody has questions, if we went, I could spend hours talking about sort of all of that kind of interplay. And some people have heard me present on that as well before. So one of the things that came out, which was huge, was the issue of honoraria research. And it came out over and over again, and we weren't surprised by that. It's something that many of us have been grappling with. But what we thought about was how are we going to grapple with this kind of data? And so we looked towards what are sort of the formal rules, if we think of them, around research ethics that offer this kind of guidance. So honoraria is not something we often see. The language of honoraria or honorarium isn't actually in any formal ethics guidelines or documents. We talk about things like incentives and reimbursement in particular in Canada. So incentives are anything offered to participants, monetary or otherwise, for their participation. It's something to help with recruitment, and it differs from reimbursement. And what's important about incentives is they're relevant to the voluntariness of participation. Now this is how the use of incentives gets positioned, as I said, in the more sort of formal guidelines and structures. What we have in Canada to help us think about this is that they shouldn't be so large so that they would encourage people to undertake risks that are far beyond what they should undertake, or that they would engage in something they normally wouldn't want to engage in. That's kind of our general sort of rule, we'll call it. And it shouldn't also be something they would engage in that would contradict their values, beliefs, that kind of thing. It shouldn't be so much that it contributes to them doing that. And reimbursement, which is a little bit different, is the reimbursement for participation-related expenses. And so we think about that in the context of childcare and travel and those kinds of things. So this is there's a lot, I mean, I'm minimizing in terms of formal rules. There's been a lot written and developed around models of payment and those kinds of things, particularly in the US. And some of our guidelines and principles are different between the two countries. But these are our general Canadian guidelines. And what it also says in our Tri-Council policy statement is that we should, as researchers, work with our REBs to help sort out and figure out what a suitable incentivization would be and what's appropriate for the communities and the participants that we work with. And as we'll see down the road, that's a really heavy load to put on REBs because they're really grappling with similar issues in and of themselves and often have challenges in figuring that out, particularly when they're not familiar with the community context and that kind of thing. So within these formal rules, the big concerns that we have are issues of coercion and undue influence. Now these words get conflated, or undue influence gets completely often overlooked, and we always use this big language of coercion. But coercion is a really powerful concept. It's a very complicated kind of thing, and it's very extreme when it involves a form of threat or punishment for failure to participate. So it's not the same as an undue influence, or it's a more severe form, I should say, with the impact of unequal power relations. So undue influence, the person, it's just too good to pass up in some ways, whereas in fact they might not want to participate, or it might not be the best thing, but it's just too good to pass up. It's kind of a simplistic way to think about that. And the concerns, as I said before, in this kind of thing is around the voluntariness and how this affects how voluntary, this very complicated word of voluntary, how it actually affects people's voluntary engagement. And so we took those ideas of the formal rules, and we took our interviews with our 86 people, and we took our analysis of all the things that we think about, and we took our critical perspectives on power and inequity and all those kinds of things, and we decided that we were going to develop a code called incentives, and that would be, fabulous and capture everything. And so in that code, as you can see, these are kinds of some of the words and that come out, and you'll see the relationship in those words to pay, money, honoraria, research questions. You'll see issues around methodology, methods, the type of relationship, the role of the researcher, the role of the participant, and also this idea around accountability. But money and payment come out as sort of these core ideas. And thinking about money and payment, because it means different things to different people. But you can see the mess of these kinds of things. And I always love that like comes out as the first word. It is, if you actually go into the data, every sentence has the word like, and So you'll see those things kind of play out. So I thought I left it in because everyone says, well, why do you have like up there? And it's like, because in our English language, like has become a fundamental part of how we communicate, particularly when we're reflecting and thinking about something and we're grappling with it. Like comes out. It is, when we did the word count and checked, it is that phrase is the most frequent phrase in all of our qualitative data with, it doesn't matter who. We did it for people, for whatever. So, but we'll see these big things that really focus on this idea that the research questions, the money, and somebody wants something. So those kinds of ideas came out loud and clear in how we thought about it. And so our big aha one of the big things that we took away in terms of working in this data, and again, as I said, in a very preliminary kind of way, is that participants and researchers do not think in terms of reimbursement and incentives and compensation in the same way that the guidelines think about them necessarily. It's not that they're completely disconnected, but they don't, that's not even the language that people use. Honoraria and payment are the two big words and what that means. And the rules around thinking about undue influence, those kinds of things, they don't, and coercion, or what's the difference between a reimbursement and an incentive, people don't think about. They don't take it up in that same kind of way, particularly participants. Childcare, why did you participate? Well, it was easy to get here because I didn't have to worry about childcare. To them, that's an honoraria. Childcare is an honoraria. So even thinking about the language and how people think about things, I think is really important. The other thing, and you'll see this little in the corner, is that this disconnect between what people think about, what the rules or guidelines say, and what people think about, and those kinds of things have been described as wicked problems and wicked ethics. And this idea of wicked came about somewhere in the 60s, and what it meant is that we were looking at ideas around hyper-rationality and rational and sort of engineering sciences, and it came out of that where those kinds of methods and methodologies didn't actually tackle the social issues and social policy problems that people were dealing with in the kind of work that they've done. And so more recently, we're seeing people, particularly in HIV-related research, talking about this idea of wicked ethics. That what we do on the ground as researchers and what we engage with as participants is very much disconnected from the formal rules and guidelines, thank you, of what we actually have in practice. And this is sort of one of our big takeaways from this, because this disconnect between the ideal and the guidelines of ideal and what is happening on the ground is really creating, for some people, a lot of conflict around how to do it well, and what they're actually able to do, particularly as researchers and as participants. When can I say no, for example? What would be an appropriate no? If I don't like what's happening, what's the recourse that I have? So despite all of our guidelines around, we've all got those statements that say, if you have any concerns, call this person, do all that kind of thing, or how does this incentive play out, or when should I get it? When in the research engagement encounter that I have, when it should happen, it's just not at all lining up very much in the real world in this context. I'm definitely not going to speak for everybody's context, but I'm seeing it in particular, and it's been something I've been grappling with for, as I said, for over a dozen years. And so when we think about it, these kinds of honoraria or honorarium, there's many different things, many diverse forms of our incentives, their compensation, and our reimbursement. And that the forms can take cash. So cash is often, and out of this data, cash is the most common type of honoraria that's offered. And it can range. So you can have $3 for a meeting, and you can have $150 for an interview. You can have, we were talking to one participant who got $1,000 to participate in a project. So you've got this huge range around cash and incentivization and what that kind of plays out for. But so if we're thinking about the context of sex work, and we're thinking about the context of sex work research in Canada, we are talking about primarily research with primarily women right now. There's a lot of gaps in who's included in research. We're talking about women who are street involved, living in severe poverty, often who experience violence, mental health issues, substance use, unstable housing, all of that context. That is who we're primarily doing research with in Canada, despite the fact that about 85% of sex workers in Canada do not fit into any of those social categories. But that's where the research is occurring, and that's who it's occurring with. So in that context, the honoraria starts to have diverse meanings for researchers and for participants. So, and when I put up some of the quotes from people, research, there's no way around it. Research is an industry. It is a financial source of income. It is a source of being able to buy food, be able to pay for housing, being able to not do sex work or not be on in a particularly unsafe location. It is definitely playing out as a very particular type of industry. And it's not just in sex work. We're seeing that in other forms of research as well. The meanings that researchers take up with it, it is things that vary from, I can't get into the community without it. So it's access. It is access to participants. It is access to people who will participate in their research. So at a community level and at an individual level. And others, as we'll see in some of it, it is something we should do, supposed to do. There's a lot of conversation around the moral obligation to pay people to be research participants. And there's lots of debate around that in the researchers who took part. Some people are like, we should never do it. But out of those 17, 16 agree that is something that we have a moral obligation to do. And they perceive that as a reimbursement for people's time, for their loss of income, all those kinds of things. It is, so this idea of that recruitment, you've got this interesting mix between I can't get into community unless I have money to pay people. I can't get people to participate because nobody will be a research participant anymore if I don't offer money. Nobody will, none of these sex workers, I actually have this quote, I don't have it here, none of these sex workers will talk to me if I don't pay them. So we have these kinds of, and community organizations are saying, what is your incentive? What is your honoraria? That is the first question they ask if somebody wants to come and do research. What are you giving to the people who participate? How much? What's the context? What do they have to do for it? It has become very much how we think about that whole researcher community and participant relationship kind of thing. There's diverse processes. So there's all kinds of things that are happening that people lump under this big umbrella of honoraria. Some, you give the money to the community organization and they dole out to who participates. They make the decision. Some of it goes to the community, to the organization, some of it goes to the participants. So this idea of even one-on-one and the voluntariness and the negotiation around that honorarium participation, it actually happens at a community level. And they recruit. They pick who you get to talk to. So it plays out in a very, very complicated kind of way. Some people provide an incentive at the beginning of an interview. Some people only do it at the end. Some people provide gift cards or options. Would you like a gift card or cash? And in those situations, they make decisions about who gets what offers. So the process may be, we'll have things like, I don't want to offer these women, I use that, not my language, these women money, they'll just use it to buy drugs. So we're going to give a gift card. And then you'll hear the response, I don't drink coffee, what am I supposed to do with this Tim Hortons? So we've got all these kinds of processes and things that are happening at the same time. There's also a diversity in the benefits. So researchers get in, they get data. There's also a thing, and we have lots of data on this, that says, I just tell them whatever they want. What do you want to hear? I'll just tell you. And they say, I wonder about how accurate people's data is, because I'm here solely for the purpose of the fact that there's payment. So I'll just tell you whatever you want. Because whatever gets me in and out the door faster matters more than the information that I give you. And that's not across the board with all of the research participants that we spoke with, but it's strong enough to be an issue that people are talking about. What will get me back so that I can get more money? How do I get into this rule? And what's happening is we also have, in terms of these benefits and harms, I actually have a statement from a man who told me his blood is no good anymore. And I asked him, why is his blood no good? He's like, I'm undetectable. My HIV is undetectable. I'm not eligible for any research. So the incentivization studies that they pay for people to come in and adhere to treatment, for example, he's like, so, I have to make a decision. If I go off my meds and I become detectable, I can go back to the study. And these are the very real and complicated kinds of things that get mucked up in this issue around payment. And I'm going to preface all of this with saying, I don't have solutions, but these are really complicated things that we really need to grapple with. And you'll also see these other benefits where people and organizations are negotiating with researchers. They're using the honoraria as a way to have a conversation with a researcher about the whole ethical design of their study. But the honoraria is a starting point for that conversation. And so it's allowing for a different type of conversation that's happening between the organizations. Because researchers who have money get farther in the door. And it allows for a different type of conversation than researchers who never get in the door. So these are really complicated and difficult kinds of issues. And I'm going to put up some quotes from the research participants and then who participate in research and then the researchers who have participated in our study. And they're just examples. And some of them are a little bit harsh, but I think that it's really important to hear from people what it is that they have to say and think about what honoraria means, not just in the context of how we pay people, but how we actually do our research overall. So this is from a participant who fits all of the stereotype of who's participating in sex work research. So this person is unstable housing, street-based sex work, significant mental health issues, all kinds of things going on in their life. And so they say, for the amount they give us, 25 bucks, 30 bucks, I don't think there's any kind of therapy that will be able to cover the bill for the damage that was done in bringing up old memories and reliving the incidents. To open old wounds like that and then say, well, here's your payment, and walk away and leave us like that. It's not very professional. It's like they're paying to put us through suffering all over again. And I picked this quote intentionally, and I get that there's a lot of good things that I could say, but I really picked this one because it is such a dominant theme in the data that we have. And the issue of re-traumatization for people who have experienced significant violence, historically, ongoing, current, in many, many types and shapes and forms, and what researchers are asking and what participants are being asked to disclose and share came out as a huge issue, something that is probably our biggest starting point in terms of what we're going to do with this data is the re-traumatization of people in the context of participating in research. And so remember that I said that the majority of people are living in extreme poverty. And if their primary motivation for research participation is a source of income, we're in this real disconnect place. And I'm not saying that researchers are unethical and not thinking about these things or those kinds of things, but this is what's playing out, and honoraria are wrapped up in all of this, as well as all of the things that we think we have the right to ask sex workers. And I have this other beautiful quote that says, go ask this person in West Van. Go ask a lady in West Van what kind of sex she's having, who she's having it with, when's the last time it was violent, how many times she's ever had violence in her life, what kind of violence, can she describe her last violent assault? Go ask her and see how far you get. And it's a beautiful statement, and I think it's a really powerful thing to think about in the context of what it is that we ask people and how we ask them, and that this payment issue is playing out in all of that. And as I said, I put this up intentionally because it's throughout everything that we're talking about, and researchers are grappling with this as well. The other thing in terms of thinking about what this means for people, not everybody likes to stand at the corner, and they would rather do a survey for 20 bucks or whatever, just for an hour. It gets them off the corner, whether it's a $3 or $5 meeting. I let other women know about it because every penny helps. So this is the other really important piece about honoraria. It spreads like wildfire. When there is an honoraria and a research study, it spreads throughout the community. There's a network that happens where people share. And when people share, we often as researchers are not quite prepared, or we haven't thought through perhaps what's going to happen to us when it gets out that we're doing a survey and you can get 20 bucks. And I can tell you from my own experience that not having been thought that through or not having sufficient supports in place for when that happens, it's bedlam, and it's really, really hard on the community. I get to go home, but we've now created chaos in the community. We've created competition. Who gets to participate? Who doesn't? How do we actually navigate that? We also get people who want to participate who don't meet any of the inclusion criteria that happen, but they'll figure it out, and they'll tell you exactly what it is that you want to know so they can participate in that research. So these things are really, as I said, it's a really difficult issue. But the other piece is that when people talk about this, they talk about this, even though there's all this harm, they talk about how important it is to have research and payment. Not just to make money, but people grapple with the idea that science matters and research matters. And they want to contribute. It's not an either or. They want to contribute to making a difference. So it's all wrapped up together. But we asked, so given what you've said, number one reason you participate in research, all other things aside, single biggest answer, money. So 53 people and 50 people said money. And of the people who didn't say money, none of those people were living in poverty. So it matters. It's that kind of thing that kind of works its way out. So, in researchers, we also see that with researchers, there's, as I said, a different kind of moral positioning around some of this. It's not simply an issue of the incentivization and get people to participate in those kinds of things. We see words like deserving and obligation and those kinds of things. So I think that it deserves payment, participation in research, but sometimes they have problems making the difference between coming to the clinic for research and coming to the clinic to get services. So it's hard for them to understand why they won't get money. The clinic doesn't pay for the consultation. And again, these are very provocative kinds of quotes that I've picked, where one of the things that we see is that where does research happen? How does honoraria play out? And we have research studies where you can come and we'll take your blood and we'll do a survey and we'll take other tissue samples, but it's not about your care, but it's happening at a place where you may attend to care. And so people actually start to get really confused about what is their care and the care that they have a right to receive and that kind of thing, and what is research. And in spending time traveling around Canada and talking with people really don't know. So what they've consented to, whether or not this is part of their regular care or now they're involved in some clinical research. They have no idea. And it's not because people aren't smart or aren't savvy, but it's that they have so much going on, right? So if you've got poverty, mental health issues, unstable housing, you have all this going on, and now you've got so much research that's happening. So everywhere that you go, if you're a sex worker in Canada and you go to an organization, I can guarantee you there's at least 5 studies associated with that organization at any given time. Most often, one organization has 45 current projects attached to it. So you can imagine what that looks like. So how do you do usual care? What does that look like? How do people translate that? And all of those studies have an honoraria system built into them. The other is, this other quote, cash compensates them for their time. It's the time they lose, the clients they would have, or the other things they do outside of sex work. If they come and take 2 or 3 hours at a time, again, this idea of it deserves some money. It's the principle of it. So researchers take this up as a very important and very relevant thing to do with people. They see value in it, not just in recruitment, and how important that is, and that we have to get our numbers and that kind of thing, but they see it as almost a moral obligation and commitment to the people that they work with, to recognize the expertise and what they're asking of them when they come into the room. And this was very common throughout our researchers. So basically, one of the things is we've been grappling with kind of thinking about this project and how we'll do this. And so I was trying to think about what I would do if I had one thing to say about this project. What would be my one statement? And it was, I got asked by one of my co-investigators, and this project also has a national advisory of experiential experts, so people with sex work history, and we got asked, what's the biggest takeaway? So we took this back to them, and this piece is very, very important. Poverty equals research participation. There's no way around it, particularly in research that is specifically targeting sex workers to participate in some way. And I would argue that it probably does in a lot of contexts, but I'm speaking to the context that I'm most familiar with. And that this creates a lot of issues. So when we think about undue influence, we think about our guidelines around our TCBS guidelines, which are designed to help us think about and unpack some of these issues. How does this play out when this is what we're seeing? And how voluntary, so the issues that come out is how voluntary is that participation? Should we not do it? What kind of data are you getting? Is your data the right data? Are you actually answering your research questions? If people are saying, I'll tell you whatever you want, I don't know, I don't care. What do you want to hear? If you have traumatized somebody or somebody's experienced a significant re-traumatization and are in crisis, what's happening in that interview process? There's so many things that are, what happens to them when they leave? So this is our takeaway from that sort of thing. But we have a second takeaway that is also part of this. Power dynamics and the construction of sex workers as other equals paternalism, entitlement and privilege of researchers in the research process, and re-traumatization. And this is a really hard pill as somebody who's committed to doing the work that I do to swallow and think about. But this is what's playing out. When the participant said to me, would you go ask a person in West Van, would you ask a woman in West Van this question, or would you expect someone to give up their blood in this context, or would you submit to, their 5th pelvic exam this month, or all of these kinds of things? What does that mean? What does that say about what we think sex workers' issues are, and what do we think sex workers' role are in the research process? And these are the questions that community organizations and their members are asking. And there is a huge rise and a huge movement among those organizations to push back and ask those kinds of questions. And so when I talk about the entitlement and privilege of the research process, again, it's not saying, oh, all these researchers are bad and awful, but we're on a really bad path, and we've been on this path. In 50 years of research in Canada, we've done nothing to improve the working conditions or the health or safety of sex workers working who are street-based. We still have an unprecedented number of murder that occurs at that. We still have an unprecedented number of other types of violence. We have done nothing to curb the housing crisis, and we've done nothing to actually alter what translates to people and who are there and the kinds of things that they experience. So, and if we're re-traumatizing people in the process, and I'm not saying all research does this, but if we are hearing this from a small sample, this is 53 people across Canada and their community organizations, that this theme is dominant, not just in Canada, but globally. So the International Sex Workers Project, which is an organization of experiential people who are looking to aggregate all the different projects that are happening around the world and talk about their impact and the kind of research that would be done, their big statement is, please stop. Do something different and ask us something different, and certainly to engage us. So what started out as honoraria, money, yes, no, how much, in what context, do I give it at the beginning, do I give it at the end, do I give a gift card, who makes that decision, took us into this path where the money is reflective of something that is a much bigger and more complicated problem that we have around research engagement with people who experience significant marginalization and access to all of the resources necessary for health, including how they're presented and judged in the world. And so we started to ask then, what does an ethical incentive look like from this perspective of communities and participants? I'm not ignoring the importance of researchers. When I hear the moral obligation or the moral commitment to researchers to try and do something of value, to acknowledge the contributions that people make, But what does it mean from community's perspective? What does it mean if we are contributing our major job in community is as a source of revenue? If that's the perception, what does that mean? How do we make the right decisions? How do we address the REB and rule gaps? So REBs, some people in the room can attest to this, have pushed back to say, your money's too much, or we don't think you should give cash. And we're having a conversation and saying, how did you make that decision? You're giving too much money. And I'm like, I'm asking somebody, so, people talked about, in some context, $150 is the going rate for a qualitative interview in many, many places in Canada. That's not optional in many of you who talk to do international research. You can't do that in other countries. It's way too much money. So how do you kind of negotiate that, and how do you help REBs understand the different context of what, if you're thinking about it, and researchers are thinking about it, paying for people for their time and wages lost from having clients or other work that they do, how do you help REBs grapple with that? Because many don't know, is what we're hearing. Or in my personal experience in talking with people in here, REBs are not asking any questions, but they're instead asking how I, as a researcher, is going to be safe in this community. And those things they're part of that problematic. And I think we're missing the opportunity to engage with people and have those kinds of conversations. What are the best processes for the use of money and other types of things in research, and who has the best solutions? And I think these are questions, as I said, I don't have all of the answers. I have very few answers, which is one of the big challenges. I have ideas and thoughts, and I have lots of input and engagement with advisories on a sort of national level who are grappling with these same issues because of how it plays out to the community members that they serve. So I always go back to these kinds of things of the moral aims. What are our moral aims in health research? To promote health and improve health service. It infers a sense of obligation in what we do. So it can help us think about what role does incentivization or what role does honoraria, as people think about it and take it up, play in what we do. These rules, though, when we think about undue influence and we think about coercion, they're more than just rules. They are a praxis. There is a way to engage with them. They're not just something that is irrelevant and to the side or some hoop that we have to jump through. But how we engage with them and we think about them in the field has a praxis to it. We have to, in research, in our designs, we have to think about the structural and systemic inequities. Our research has to take that into consideration. All that we do when we're working with people who experience this kind of marginalization, we're embedded in that complete system of inequity. And if we don't take that into consideration in our design, then we're going to run into a lot of those issues. In our research processes, how we think about honoraria can perpetuate those inequities in some way. And we need a way of engagement that can challenge and intervene to address the inequities that are happening and how we think about and make those kinds of things up. So this is kind of, when I was thinking about coming today, I was like, I have no idea what to talk about. This is just a mess. I don't even know where to start in some ways. I was trying to think about theoretically, what would my theoretical framework be, and what would be my, all of those things. And I have all of those tools in my toolbox, but it was really about an opportunity to come and say, we're all engaged in this. Most of us in the room are engaged in research, if not all of us, in some way. There's huge problems with how it's playing out, and it's playing out in a very complicated way. And we need to engage with that mess and with the people who are living in that mess on a daily basis to try and find solutions. And before we open for questions, I just want to acknowledge the tremendous input and support that we get for the work that we do, with all of the people who come forward to participate, the community advisors, and all of the organizations that we work with across the country and internationally that support this kind of work. And these are the various projects that we have that are going on where we're grappling in these kinds of things. And a lot of what I'm talking about is drawn not just from the ethics project, but from those projects as well. And actually the ethics project came out of the spaces project because one of the things that happened when we were in the field doing this large ethnographic work is we kept getting questions about, why are you offering an incentive up front and you don't want to know about my trauma history? That's actually, and so we started having those conversations with our advisories, and that's actually how our ethics project came to be. And in our Street to Screen, we're grappling with the public openness of technology and people's information, and how do we work within that. And our outreach project, which is really looking at how do we engage with women, the women who are very much street involved, and in a way that actually addresses some of these inequities, and how does Honoraria how are we going to do that in that context, and what that looks like. And then these are all I'm very fortunate for all of the sources of funding that help us to do the work that we do. And my last thing for the end is, this was just a great comment on this idea around sex workers as somebody that people can ask those really complicated questions of, or invasive questions. And researchers need to be knowledgeable about trauma-informed care, the importance of the local context, and they need to leave their messed up morality at the door. And I got asked when I talked if I would make sure that this message came across in every talk that I did, and share that with. So, thank you. And those are my dogs. They go everywhere with me. If I can't bring them with me, I take them in pictures.